Everyone has something they're afraid of. Everyone has phobias. How about bathyphobia? That's the fear of depths. Or maybe nyctophobia, which is the fear of darkness. And, of course, claustrophobia, the fear of enclosed spaces. Now, combine all these phobias into one and get ready to hear stories that will give you chills down your spine. Because the main characters in today's video encountered this horror in real life. Fear is the oldest and strongest of human emotions. And the oldest and strongest fear is the fear of the unknown. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to everyone. I'm Story Channel, and you're on the channel diary of Real Polydori, Pam Pam. Here, we gossip, discuss, and unravel the real mysteries of this world and our lives. There are many hobbies out there, like crocheting, dancing, singing, and, of course, speleology. Okay, actually, speleology is a science that studies underground natural spaces. But there are extremists, and I can't call them anything else, who engage in speleology for recreational purposes as a hobby. They explore the underground, narrow, and dark world of various caves, getting new vivid emotions and impressions in the process. By the way, I would never in my life risk getting such vivid emotions. 20-year-old John Edward Jones was a very active child from a young age. He never sat still. He discovered his passion for caves at a fairly early age. His father often took John and his younger brother Josh on speleological descents. As he grew up, the guy explored many other underground worlds and became widely known in the circle of professional speleologists because of it. John often had the desire to dedicate his entire life to speleology and perhaps even continue studying the underground world of caves and mountains for science. However, the guy kept speleology as an important hobby in his life. He was simultaneously studying to become a pediatric cardiologist and devoted all his free time to his family and speleology. He had a young daughter and a wonderful wife. The couple was expecting another child at that time. The family was living in Virginia then, but one November day in 2009, the family went to visit relatives for Thanksgiving. The whole family gathered. Taking advantage of such a wonderful opportunity, John suggested to his younger brother Josh to reminisce about their youth and go on a small speleological adventure to the Nutty Putty cave. Nutty Putty is a hydrothermal cave located in the state of Utah. It's very popular for its large number of narrow passages and turns. Its total length is 413 meters, and its depth is 45 meters. This cave was long considered fairly simple to explore, and beginner speleologists came here to gain experience. Nutty Putty was discovered in 1960. Back then, the first explorers realized that this cave was very unusual. The thing is, when the speleologists came back out, they were all covered in clay. The cave's name, by the way, translates to Nutty Putty in honor of that very clay. Since then, Nutty Putty became very popular, and according to some data, over 5,000 people could visit it in a year. However, many speleotourists often descended into Nutty Putty at night, neglecting safety rules. And safety when visiting this cave should be at a high level, and I'll explain why right now. The main danger of descending into Nutty Putty is the slippery surfaces. And there's a very surprising place in Nutty Putty called the Big Slide. This is an underground cavity with a sloped floor, the crawling aorta, the scout eater, Ed's push, the maze. Honestly, it sounds more like titles of horror movies. In 2006, a proposal was made to limit the number of visitors. After that, the development of a special visitation regulation and safety requirements began. And it was in 2009 that the cave was reopened for visits. And that's exactly when John Edward Jones and his younger brother Josh decided to go there. It's worth noting that by that time, John had a significant break from descents, as he was fully immersed in his studies and family. As for John's younger brother Josh, his speleological experience was significantly less, but he still had some. On November 25, 2009, around 8 p.m., the two brothers arrived at the cave. The purpose of visiting Nutty Putty was to have fun, get new emotions, and, of course, adrenaline. That's how it should have been. Along with the two brothers, there were also 9 other speleotourists. They all split into 2 groups. The first decided to stay in the large and wide depressions of the cave, while the second went to explore the little studied and winding sections of Nutty Putty. John and Josh decided to be in the second group, as they considered themselves experienced speleologists, so they decided to take the risk. Both groups descended, and for the first hour, everything was really fine. The group explored the widest part of the cave, the Big Slide. But then John decided to take a risk and find a place called the birth canal. It was very popular among experienced speleologists. This was one of the narrowest and most dangerous places in the cave due to its increased difficulty. Not everyone, even experienced speleologists, dared to go there. You have to crawl into the birth canal extremely carefully. John and Josh, along with 2 other speleologists, set off to carry out this risky adventure. John crawled first. On the way to the birth canal, the group split up more than once. This way, the guys thought they could find the birth canal faster. And at one point, John was left alone and noticed a narrow passage. He was sure then that this was the entrance to the birth canal. John was so happy at that moment that he threw all his strength into getting to this famous place first. But after some time, the guy caught himself thinking that he had been crawling for quite a long time, and the narrow passage wasn't ending but only getting narrower. It narrowed so much that crawling forward became extremely difficult, and there was no expansion where he could change direction or turn back. And finally, happiness in John Johnson's eyes. Ahead of the narrow passage, he saw a sharp descent downward. He thought then that there should be an expansion of the tunnel right there. He crawled into this descent and began to move carefully further. But as he moved, he realized he had made a fatal mistake. He had ended up in a deadly dead end. John Johnson was stuck. Just a couple of meters decided his fate. Judging by the information on the internet, John most likely missed the passage to the birth canal and turned into a place called Ed's Push. And the problem here is that the place called Ed's Push doesn't lead to any other expansions. It doesn't lead anywhere at all. You could say it's a dead end. John was stuck upside down in an area measuring 25 by 45 centimeters, 120 meters from the cave entrance. The guy ended up jammed head down and couldn't even move. His younger brother Josh had been following him all this time. Josh only saw his brother's legs sticking out of the narrow passage, and then Josh decided to try to pull out his stuck older brother. And he even managed to lift him a little, but the body wouldn't go any further. In the end, he ended up even further than he was initially and scraped his side on some hook in this narrow tunnel. Josh understood that he definitely couldn't delay here. He quickly climbed to the surface and called for help. A few hours later, Susie Modela, a volunteer rescuer, arrived at the scene and immediately began the rescue. More than 3 hours had passed since John got into the dead end. Susie quickly reached the place where John was stuck. She tried in every way to encourage him. "Hi, John. My name is Susie. How are you? We'll get you out of here soon, don't worry." "Hi, Susie. Thanks for coming," said John, who was trying to hold on in the difficult situation. But literally a few minutes later, he was already sobbing, realizing that there were almost no chances. "I really want to get out. Oh my God. Save me." After Susie's arrival at the scene, dozens of other rescuers arrived, and in total, about 100 people tried to save the man. Doctors warned the rescuers that they had 8 to 10 hours to save him. Everything was further complicated by the fact that John was stuck in the cave upside down. In this position, blood rushes to the brain and causes a series of complications. The rescuers studied all possible passages and tunnels near John. One rescuer even discovered another narrow passage from the side where John's head was and was even able to shake his hand. But that was it. The opening was only enough for an extended hand. No equipment could be taken into the cave. Remember, the passage was so narrow that it was extremely difficult for a person to even crawl forward. Some rescuers did manage to take a hammer with them, but they didn't achieve any results with it. The hammer turned out to be useless. Now imagine, only after 19 hours did Susie and other rescuers come up with a complex system of blocks and ropes with which they could lift John. One end of the rope was tied to John's legs, and the other was pulled by the guys from the team. But just the ropes weren't enough. Due to the narrow passages, it was extremely hard to pull John without additional structures, using just the cable. At the same time, it's amazing that John, in such a position after 20 hours, was still conscious. Remember, the doctor at the beginning of the rescue operation gave John only 8 to 10 hours, and almost 20 hours had already passed. 20 hours upside down, tightly squeezed by the narrow space. It was getting harder for him to breathe, and we're not even talking about the strong blood flow to the man's brain. Soon, John Johnson's condition deteriorated sharply because the man fell into a panic. He started screaming, sobbing, trying to help himself somehow, but only made it worse. The rescuers had no choice but to give John a sedative. A few hours later, John's wife arrived at the scene. The rescuers set up a two-way cable radio that connected John's wife, who was on the surface at the entrance to Nutty Putty, and John in that very fateful narrow passage. John promised his beloved, "Darling, I will definitely come back. Hug and kiss the kids and you." A couple of hours later, the rescuers made a second attempt to get John Johnson out of the cave using ropes and a pulley. A pulley is a wheel that is fixed motionless in some place, and a cable or belt is attached to it. The construction had to be very strong. After several attempts, they managed to pull John out even half a meter, but then a new failure. One of the rescuers lost consciousness at the moment and let go of the rope. It slipped. John fell back down, and his bones broke from the pressure and impact. Now the guy was even further away. It's hard to even imagine what pain John endured then. His entire body weight was pressing on the fracture sites. After this incident, one of the rescuers crawled back to John to check his condition and was shocked. He was still alive, he was breathing, and even talking to him. A little later, a couple of rescuers took turns descending to John to check his emotional state, support him, and come up with a new plan for his rescue. One of the speleologists crawled into the narrowest passage where John was stuck but ended up stuck himself. Fortunately, this rescuer eventually managed to get out to the surface, and when he came up, he said, John stopped responding. Then a medical worker descended to John. By that time, 27 hours had passed since John was trapped in the narrow passage of Nutty Putty. The doctor pronounced death from cardiac arrest and asphyxiation. On the evening of November 25, 2009, almost 140 rescuers tried to save John from the deadly trap, but no one succeeded. John's wife insisted that her husband be retrieved in any condition from the captivity of Nutty Putty, but the rescuers didn't understand how they could do that. Later, frosts began, which made the ascent almost impossible, and for a while it stopped completely. Then, the guy's body was planned to be extracted after the onset of warmth. But alas, right after this incident, a multitude of onlookers arrived at the site who wanted to see John Johnson's sticking out legs with their own eyes. The state authorities understood that this couldn't be allowed, and if someone else got stuck or seriously injured, therefore the entrance to Nutty Putty was sealed with an explosion. John Johnson's body remained lying in the same place. John Johnson's wife personally thanked each of the rescuers despite the tragic ending. Now she is raising 2 children alone. Susie, the volunteer rescuer who was the first to arrive to save John, left the service and became addicted to alcohol. She took the guy's death hard. She saw him, heard him. She had great hope that collapsed in an instant. This story evokes a lot of emotions, from sadness to anger, and serves as a good reminder that thoughtless risk can cost very dearly. Music. Northern Thailand, June 23, 2018. The football team Wild Boars, consisting of 12 teenagers and one 25-year-old coach, Ekapal Chanthawong, decided to visit the Tam Luang Cave complex for tourist purposes. Such hikes for locals weren't considered anything unusual. It's like visiting a museum for us. And this hike was considered a gift for the football team for their excellent play. Let's take a closer look at the Tam Luang Caves. This is a karst cave complex over 10 kilometers long. It's not recommended to go deeper than 800 meters into these caves. Otherwise, you can easily get lost and end up in narrow passages. And we already know how dangerous that is. In the Tam Luang Caves, there have been plenty of cases where people went deep and then simply couldn't find the way back. These caves are very deep and winding, plus from June to November, the cave can be completely flooded, which poses additional danger. Let's go back to that very day, June 23, 2018. The football team had boys from 11 to 16 years old. They were all very friendly. The team arrived at the cave on bicycles. The guys left many things outside. Many even went barefoot. It was all because of the narrow passages inside. You can't bring much with you there. The tourist descent into the cave began. Everyone felt comfortable and was excited about the upcoming adventure. After 2 hours, one of the boys got really hungry, and there was more water underfoot. So, the worried coach Ekapal Chanthawong decided to lead the team to the exit. After walking some distance, they saw bubbling water where the narrow passage that led to the exit was originally located. Everyone started to get a little nervous and panic. Then Ekapal decided to try to dive through the passage to the exit, but almost immediately, Ekapal nearly drowned. He couldn't even feel the passage back in the water, and the water kept rising and rising. But where did the water come from? Shouldn't the coach have checked the weather forecast before leading 12 children deep into the cave? It was all because of tropical downpours, which, by the way, started completely unexpectedly, and streams of dirty water gradually but quite quickly filled all the exits from the cave, thereby cutting off the group from the surface. The tropical rains were forecasted to come 2 to 3 weeks later, so everyone was very surprised. There was nothing to do. The whole team had to go back deep into the cave, because the water shouldn't have reached there yet. Everyone hoped that the rain would subside soon and the exit would be possible. Their situation was further complicated by the fact that they didn't have much food or water, and the flashlight batteries were starting to die. When late in the evening none of the guys returned home, the parents raised the alarm. They called the other head coach of the football club, who himself didn't know where the 12 teenagers and their 25-year-old were. The alarm, of course, didn't subside, and a couple of hours later, it was found out that their children had gone on a tourist hike with the 25-year-old coach to the Tam Luang cave. And then everyone realized what nightmare could happen. The search for the missing group began that same night, and by the morning of the next day, a huge number of people had gathered at the entrance to the cave complex, both local rescuers and volunteers. There was no contact with any of the guys. Phones are obviously useless there. The first volunteers decided to try to dive into the water and swim to the guys. However, they couldn't do it. It was all because of the strong current. It simply didn't allow them to swim through the passage. Meanwhile, as if on purpose, the tropical downpour was only gaining momentum. Due to the high risk, one rescue team even refused to dive altogether. In the end, all the first dives into the Tam Luang cave turned out to be failures. After some time, Vern Unsworth responded to the call for help. He is an experienced speleologist who knew the structure of many caves very well. And at that very time, by happy coincidence, he was also in Thailand. After Vernon studied the situation in detail, drew up diagrams of passages and routes through them, he stated that the guys were most likely still alive and waiting out the flooding in so-called safety islands, in places where the water hadn't reached yet. It was also this person who officially appealed to the local authorities with a request to call for help from rescuers and experienced divers from other countries. There were no advancements, and on June 26th, 3 days after the cave flooding, Vern Unsworth appealed again to the local authorities with a request to involve experienced rescuers from the UK with 30 years of experience, Rick Stanton and John Volanthen. In his opinion, these were the best cave divers in the world. By that time, a huge crowd of people had gathered at the entrance to the Tam Luang cave complex. Every day, rescuers tried to pump out water using huge pumps, but all attempts were useless. The residents of Thailand had never seen such a huge amount of water. Meanwhile, the professional divers Rick Stanton and John Volanthen arrived in Thailand. By that time, according to some data, a little over a week had passed since the flooding. But no one, absolutely no one, had a further plan of action. By that time, the installed pumps were only coping with pumping water at the very entrance to the cave. It wasn't entirely clear how far the water had penetrated inside, and of course, with all this, the rescuers understood that the chance of finding all the guys alive and well was extremely small, but it still existed, which meant they had to act. Only on July 1st did Rick Stanton and John Volanthen make a dive, and during the very first dive, they managed to reach an air pocket, a zone where the water hadn't reached yet. And here's a surprise. There they found other men whom everyone had forgotten about after the start of the rescue operation, and they couldn't get out on their own, and there's no communication there. When these 4 men were cut off from the exit themselves, they simply started waiting for help. And in the chaos that was on the first day, no one noticed that fewer rescuers came out of the cave than went in. Volanthen and Stanton first thought they had found some boys from the team but quickly figured out the real situation. Of course, the men needed to be brought out of the cave as soon as possible. Already then, Rick and John understood that if even adult men found it so hard to swim to the exit, what would happen with the teenagers? After all, some of them don't even know how to swim, and the hope of saving all 13 lives was getting smaller and smaller with each moment. July 2nd arrives, the 10th day after the flooding. Rick and John dove into the water. A very difficult path awaited them. Finally, after swimming for several hours against a strong water pressure, they reached the air pocket. The rescuers took off their masks and smelled a strangely unpleasant odor of stale air and excrement. That's how they realized the guys were somewhere close. They looked around and saw several boys. Yes, they found the guys. How many of you are there? 13. 13? Yes, 13. That's amazing. We're here now. We've come. Many people have come. You're so strong. The problem was also that only one of the guys could speak a little English, but Rick and John had a lot of experience, so they were able to quickly assess the situation on site. And you won't believe it, but all 13 people were still alive and well at that point. Of course, the guys looked very bad, thin and pale. They were at least very cold, and I won't even mention the hunger. It's hard to imagine how they all managed to survive in such conditions for all 10 days. They could only drink rainwater that trickled down the walls. Coach Ekapal Chanthawong didn't let the kids fall into panic. Together, they often meditated, trained their breathing, and calmed themselves that way. The team also dug a tunnel daily using debris and rocks. This actually didn't bring them closer to the exit because they dug extremely slowly and not in the right direction at all. But it was this that gave them hope and toughened them up. The question arose about how to get 13 people to the surface. The children were severely exhausted and couldn't put on diving gear. And I remind you that some of the boys didn't even know how to swim. Of course, the guys were very upset when they learned that they wouldn't be able to rise to the surface that same day. By the evening of that day, military divers descended to the exhausted guys. They brought them clean water and food. Also, along with the military divers, a doctor descended to them. The entire journey for the divers and the doctor took 5 hours one way. Starting from July 3rd, the entire rescue team began developing a plan to extract the 13 people from the flooded cave. And there were only 2 options. In the first case, all the children learn diving and swim out on their own. In the second, everyone waits out the rainy season. During discussions of the rescue plan for the guys, many divers were sure that it wouldn't be possible to save everyone. Someone might panic severely. All options were extremely dangerous, but doing nothing was even worse. Time played a very important role. It was decided not to put oxygen tanks on the teenagers but to attach a mask to the rescuer. And all the equipment was distributed between 2 divers. Also, all the rescuers came to the conclusion that the guys needed to be put into a state close to trance. For this, each teenager was given a dose of ketamine and Xanax. Together, these 2 drugs immersed them in a trance-like state. The risk of this method was in the duration of action of these drugs. Halfway through, the rescuers would have to make an additional injection into the child's thigh. The children's arms and legs had to be tied with plastic zip ties so their bodies would become more streamlined and wouldn't snag on rock debris. Only on July 8th did the rescue operation officially begin. Visibility in the water was 0, which significantly hindered the path, but in the end, the rescuers successfully reached the guys. The teenagers were given all the necessary injections, put on wetsuits, masks attached, and by the evening of that day, after 8 hours of the return journey, they managed to save the first 4 boys. 2 divers and the teenagers, who were almost in an unconscious state, successfully overcame this path. All were immediately taken to the hospital. The next day, July 9th, they managed to save another 4 boys. Meanwhile, 5 people remained in the cave. The 25-year-old Coach Ekapal and the remaining 4 teenagers. July 10th arrives, the 3rd day of the rescue operation. The last guys, after 18 days in captivity, were brought to the surface. All of them were alive. After saving all 13 team members, the Tam Luang cave was completely flooded. This means that if anyone had still remained in the cave, it definitely wouldn't have been possible to save them. The rescue of the entire team seemed like a real miracle. Now they faced a 10-day rehabilitation. They weren't allowed to see their relatives because it could threaten their weak immunity. But the guys recovered at a very fast pace. They started eating in small portions. There were no serious injuries among the guys, so soon all of them were completely healthy. This story flew around the world and formed the basis for the film 13 Lives and the miniseries Thai Cave Rescue. In total, the football coach and team spent a whole 17 days in the Tam Luang cave. Even Elon Musk offered his help in rescuing the football team. During the rescue operation, unfortunately, one of the divers died due to equipment malfunction. Also, some Thai farmers sacrificed their sown fields. The thing is, the water that was pumped out of the Tam Luang cave by the pumps had to be disposed of somewhere, especially in such a huge amount. So, some farmers sacrificed their huge harvest to save the boys. 17 days of hell ended in a real miracle. Phew. Well, today we dissected 2 just unreal stories. Yes, they have different endings, but the meaning is the same. Cherish your life, don't take unnecessary risks. But if you find yourself in a difficult situation, fight to the last. As always, I'll be very, very interested to hear your opinion in the comments and gossip with you. Also, I remind you that I run my Telegram channel where I'm in touch with you daily. There, I post announcements for new videos, share something from my personal life, and show you what I can't show you here. And, of course, if you liked everything, I'm waiting for your like, comment, and subscription. Well, that's all for today. This was Polly Dory. Good morning, day, or evening to everyone. Bye-bye.